Hello, it's Coach Sharon, and I will be working with you through this module. Welcome to Module 5. In this module, we will answer the question, what will it cost? Looking at costs associated with adoption will facilitate insight and clarify the responsibility associated with adopting a child. In this module, we will begin to consider all of the cost factor. The learning objective is to help you understand the financial obligation you'll be making, which is very tangible, and the intangible expenses associated with adoption. As we mentioned in the introduction, one of the questions that is most likely to be at most on your minds is, do I have enough money to adopt a child? The answer is not quite as straightforward as you might think. Of course, budgetary concerns do factor into this important decision. The initial costs associated with the process of adopting a child can vary depending upon the way you adopt and the type of adoptions as well as other factors, which may surprise you. There are two basic ways of adopting: domestic within the United States and international or intercontinental adoption, which is anywhere outside of the US. As we mentioned, there are two basic ways to adopt. The first look at the costs of domestic adoption will be discussed here. Adopting through the state is typically the least expensive way to adopt. Private adoptions through an agency will be more expensive, and independent adoptions are likely to be the most expensive. The average cost of adopting a child in the United States is between $20,000 and $60,000. This price can carry over legal fees, home studies, travel, and lodging, court fees, and medical and living expenses for the expected mother. According to the Child Welfare Information Gateway, adoptions can cost anywhere from $1,000 to $60,000, depending upon the type of adoption pursued. Foster care and public adoptions are between $0 and $5,000. Licensed private adoption agencies charge between $30,000 and $60,000, and independent adoptions are $25,000 to $45,000 plus. This is a slight overview of what you will be facing should you choose to do a domestic adoption. As we said, costs vary by types of adoption, and it's an important reality which you should know is that there are few infants available for adoption. That means that infant adoption will be the most costly and almost always will be through an agency independently arranged by an attorney. Additionally, some people use adoption facilitators to help them identify a prospective adoption situation. Facilitators' fees can vary widely and can run into thousands of dollars. By the way, facilitators are not licensed and may not be regulated. Requirements and guidelines vary by state. Older child adoptions are usually arranged through the state social service system and their contract agencies. Prices range from hundreds to a few $1,000s. Occasionally, some post adoption subsidiaries may be available, and this can help offset future expenses. Kinship adoption refers to the formal legal adoption of a child by grandparents, aunts, uncles, godparents, or other siblings. There are still cost factors involved, but they are typically much smaller in arranging for formalizing this type of adoption. In summary, the average cost of adopting a child in the United States can be reasonably estimated as between $20,000 and $45,000. This price can cover legal fees, home studies, travel and lodging, court fees, medical and living expenses for the birth parent. For independent domestic adoption, parents find the birth mother without an agency and use the adoption lawyer to facilitate all of the legal aspects of the paperwork. You can see how difficult it is to predict the cost of adoption. Also remember, no one can guarantee you a placement or a specific time frame. If you decide to adopt, be sure to perform your due diligence in identifying who you will work with. Some folks think international adoption is less expensive. However, this is not necessarily true. Depending on the country of adoption, international adoption costs can vary greatly. Parents should plan to pay between $20,000 and $50,000 for an international adoption. Typically, costs are associated with international adoption can include any fees of the United States or sponsoring agency. This usually includes the international agency fee, but may not. Other costs include flights, hotels, meals, miscellaneous, and intercountry fees as well. Sometimes the agency or orphanage requires a donation. You may have to take several trips to the country from which you are adopting. Also, sometimes you must stay in the country for several weeks, so include the cost of time off from your work into your calculation as well. Another unexpected expense you might not know about is readoption. This is a process in which international adopters adopt a child a second time in front of the U.S. judge. Remember that rules in the country change quite frequently. Countries can even unexpectedly suspend your adoption temporarily or even permanently. As we mentioned in Module 1, the most important issue is to ensure the health and well-being of both mother and child. Along with that, there may be additional costs you may need to consider, like working with more than one agency, creating a profile, either video or book, etc., preparing your home, getting your finances in order, updating and executing your will, hiring an adoption coach or hiring a counselor, and then there's childcare expenses. In addition, prospective adoptive parents may pay for the expected mother's medical, housing, or day-to-day living expenses, and any other complications experienced after the birth by either mother or baby. Also important is to consider are the costs after the adoption takes place, like ongoing medical expenses, for example, or even unanticipated legal fees. Your social worker may ask you to work with a counselor to help you prepare for adopting a child and becoming an adoptive parent. If you have a child already, you will also face childcare costs when you are attending meetings, classes, visits, or even an interaction with your attorney or anything like that that's going to pull you away from the home. These additional costs can take a bite out of your time and out of your pocketbook. Let's talk about unanticipated costs. These can range from nominal to significant. For example, medical expenses of the mother and or the child, which may not have been included initially. You may want to have a medical assessment to evaluate a particular condition to help you gauge if you are capable of taking care of a specific diagnosis or a situation that comes up. Another unanticipated cost might be the cost of traveling to meet and then have subsequent visits with the expected mother. Usually you can have a good idea of what legal expenses will be. However, unexpected legal costs can occur. For example, if a man doesn't learn he is a birth father until after the adoption, he might decide to contest it and seek custody for the child. Obviously, this will be traumatic for all involved and expensive as well. By the way, this situation can be avoided by securing the proper surrendering documents that ensure the parents' rights of both the birth mother and the birth father before the child is placed in your family. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. What if the expectant mother changes her mind while you're in the process of adopting? Well, this is less likely to happen if the expectant mother has received adequate counseling and support. The purpose of counseling is so an expectant mother can make a well informed decision. It's not to ensure that she goes through with the placement of her child. This is a financial risk that you will undertake. So, when a mother does change her mind, what happens to all the money you spent on her expenses? Any money expended is lost. By the way, only legally approved expenses can be paid to the expected mother. Illegal payments place an adoption at risk of being nullified. Just know that if you decide to stop the adoption process, your money will not be refunded. This is the reason that you should feel confident about your decision to begin the adoption application process. Statistics on failure, disruption, and dissolution before and after placement can be found in the resource section of this series. In adoption, as we discussed, money is involved, and that can sometimes lead to decisions that are difficult and hard choices that you'll need to make. Ethical standards matter for the attorney, the agency, and for yourself. If you decide to adopt, you want to be able to look back and know that you followed your ethical values and that the professionals with whom you work also follow clear ethical guidelines. For example, the Academy of Adoption and Reproductive Attorneys is an organization whose members adhere to competent and ethical practices of adoption and assisted reproduction law. NACAC, the National American Council of Adopted Children, advises in cases of voluntary adoption, all parties must respect the legal and moral rights of both birth mother and birth father to consent or not consent to the adoption. Agencies and independent agents must proactively identify, inform non custodial parents of the pending adoption. To learn more about this, follow the link that is included in the reference slide. Part of deciding if you want to adopt or not is understanding the financial piece. The cost of adopting can be significant. Let's talk about ways to pay for some of these expenses. Possible options available to you before you adopt might be bank loans, family financial support, adoption assistance programs through your employer, or grants. Another way to control costs is to choose an adoption agency that uses a sliding scale. Post adoption options include federal and state adoption tax credits. You may also have a general adoption credit or incentive. As we mentioned earlier, adopting from a foster care agency may come with some subsidies for expenses, such as family therapy or medical care for the children. Some adoptions qualify for a monthly subsidy that is based on the level of the child's needs. If you decide to adopt, your emotions will be amplified, possibly in both your determination to become a parent and your fear that it won't happen for you. It makes sense, therefore, if you do decide to adopt, to be prudent when planning your adoption budget and to avoid adding undue pressures. Leave some reserves to meet the inevitable unexpected expenses. Whatever Whatever way you might decide to fund an adoption, you will benefit from staying within your budget, and good financial choices will help you to build a steady foundation on which to build your family. We focused on monetary costs of adopting, but there are also personal costs as well, especially from the perspective of the adoptee. Here are some of my insights on the cost of adoption from the adoptee's perspective. Let's look at what costs adoptees as we lose some human rights in the process of adoption. Some of the costs of adoption for adult adoptees are intangible and life altering. These costs are often overlooked and underappreciated. Did you know that only 10 U.S. states allow adult adoptees to request and obtain their own original birth certificates without discrimination? In other states and the District of Columbia, adult adoptees must obtain a court order or use ineffective and outdated registry systems. We are subject to parental control, removal, and redacted identity information that restricts the right to obtain the adoptee's own vital record. I do not have my birth certificate, for example, because I do not reside in one of the states mentioned above that allows it. Adoptees are working to change this in my state because we feel the certificate provided does not represent who we are because a document was created to support our adoptive parents' position and denies our human rights. We are therefore unable to track any medical history or identify any predisposed conditions. The issue for international adoptees is certain when they are not automatically granted citizenship. Adopted parents who adopt internationally should be committed to completing all of the necessary paperwork. If not, the adoptee may face deportation to a country where they have never lived. Adoptees face emotional health issues that are intensified by these unfortunate situations. The cost factor is heightened as our human rights are denied. Now that we've completed the module, let's look at some of the closing thoughts that our coaches have. First off, we have Sally, who's an adopted parent, and she says, although money is involved, the ability to pay should not be confused with the right to parent. Sharon, our adoptee, says, costs associated with adopted parents are different from the loss of rights the adoptee pays in the adoption process. Then we have Susan, our adopted parent, who says, be rigorous in your budgeting planning, not only for the start, but also throughout the adoption process. And finally, we have Gail, an adopted parent, who says, balance your heart and mind to ensure you make prudent financial choices. Hi, we're finally at the end of the module, and I'd like to go through a process where we again will dig a little deeper. Pull out your journal and take a moment to answer these questions. First off, we have, what steps have you taken toward budgeting? Oh, wow, that's a deep question. I know it's going to take you a bit to have those discussions with your partner and analyze where you are. Next, what type of adoption fits your family? And are you willing to be flexible? You know, that's sometimes really hard because I know in our minds we have an idea of what we want, but it's a good place to start a discussion about where you actually are and where you're willing to move through and ask yourself, is it outside of my comfort zone? And finally, what questions of the adoption professionals are you creating as you move through the decision-making process? Well, that's it for now. I know it's going to take you a bit to answer all these questions and get a strong answer down. So take your time and think about it. In our next module, we'll be answering the question, how would I begin? This is our final module, Module 6, and you're going to be looking at how to find adoption agencies and professionals, and then we're going to also help you to review ethical practices. Well, that's it for now. I know we're looking forward to talking to you again in Module 6. Thanks.